The rain had not yet started, but the air carried the weight of it, thick, restless, and humming with a faint electricity that seemed to press against the windows of the Whitmer estate. The mansion stood like an island of glass and stone, its tall windows catching the faintest glimmers of an overcast sky. Inside, chandeliers remained lit, though it was still afternoon, spilling golden light over polished floors and mirrored walls, a kind of warmth that did not always extend to the people who lived there. Elena tightened the strap of her worn leather bag as she stood at the back entrance, waiting for the electronic lock to click open. She was a small woman in her late 20s, dark curls tied back neatly, her clothes plain and practical, the kind bought second-hand, washed too many times until the fabric softened thin. Her hands were rough from years of cleaning, yet she still held herself with a quiet dignity, as if determined that no amount of scrubbing floors could take away her sense of self. When the lock finally buzzed, she stepped into the silent service corridor, greeted by the faint smell of polished wood and lemon oil. Her shoes squeaked against the tiles, and she winced at the sound, instinctively moving softer, like someone entering a sacred place where she did not entirely belong. The Whitmers were not unkind. They were simply distant. Mr. Whitmer was a man of business, rarely home except for late dinners and brief weekends. Mrs. Whitmer, tall and elegant, spent her days curating charity events and appearances, her voice always soft, her smiles carefully measured. They never spoke cruel words to Elena, but their silences were heavy, their presence filling rooms in ways that left no space for her own. That afternoon, while dusting along the upstairs corridor, her cloth brushed against the edge of a drawer that had been left slightly open. She paused. The Whitmers were careful, everything in its place, drawers always closed, books always aligned. Something about the narrow gap drew her, as though the house itself had exhaled a secret. For a long moment she hesitated, cloth frozen mid-air. Then, gently, she slid the drawer wider. Inside lay a necklace. Not just jewelry, but a piece that seemed to carry the weight of memory itself. The chain was fine, almost fragile, and at its center hung a small silver pendant in the shape of a locket. It was old, older than anything else in this meticulously modern home. The silver was tarnished, its surface scratched as if it had been clutched in desperate hands again and again. Elena reached out, fingertips trembling before they even touched it. The locket was cool against her skin. She turned it over, catching the dim glow of the hallway lamp reflected in its surface. For a second, the mansion seemed to fall silent around her, the air still, the hum of distant appliances fading, even her own breath suspended. She shouldn't open it, she knew that. This was not hers. She was here to clean, to remain unseen, to pass like a shadow through rooms not meant for her. But something in the locket called to her, a pull as quiet as a heartbeat. Her thumb pressed against the clasp. The locket opened. Inside, behind a cracked layer of glass, was a photograph. A girl, no older than 10, smiling brightly at the camera, her hair caught in mid-motion as if she'd been laughing when the picture was taken. The edges of the photo were yellowed, worn, as though someone had carried it close for years. Elena's chest tightened. She knew the Whitmers had no children. The house bore no trace of them, no toys, no photographs, no laughter in the halls, and yet here was proof, small and undeniable, hidden away in the drawer of a house that spoke only of order and perfection. "Elena," the voice startled her, sharp as a bell. She snapped the locket shut, nearly dropping it back into the drawer. Mrs. Whitmer's figure appeared at the end of the corridor, tall, graceful, her heels clicking softly on the hardwood floor. Her expression was unreadable, as always, polite, distant, framed in an elegance Elena could never quite reach. "Elena?" "Yes, ma'am?" Mrs. Whitmer's eyes lingered on her for a moment too long, searching, before she finally gave a faint smile. "The dining room, when you have a moment." "Yes, ma'am." When Mrs. Whitmer disappeared down the stairs, Elena placed the locket carefully back into the drawer, sliding it shut until it clicked back into its seamless place. But the weight of it remained in her hands, in her chest, as if she were still holding it. The rain began against the windows a few minutes later, soft at first, then steady, like the house itself was breathing heavier now. And Elena, carrying her dust cloth and bucket, walked toward the dining room with the echo of a little girl's smile imprinted on her heart.
The dining room always felt colder than the rest of the house. Perhaps it was the marble floors, or the way the long table stretched like a silent ocean between its ends. Even when filled with polished silverware and glowing candles, it seemed more like a stage than a place where people shared meals. Elena had noticed long ago that the Whitmores never truly ate here as a family. They dined, yes, but they didn't share. As she polished the crystal glasses, her mind was elsewhere. The locket, the girl, the smile frozen in time. It was hard to imagine laughter echoing through these high ceilings. Harder still to picture Mrs. Whitmore with a child, her posture too perfect, her voice too composed. She wiped the last glass and stepped back. The chandelier above caught the light in prisms, scattering small rainbows over the tablecloth. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring, her hands trembling with a restlessness she couldn't name. "Elena," the voice again, softer this time but no less sharp. She turned to find Mrs. Whitmore at the doorway, her figure framed by the hallway's golden light. She was holding a wine glass, delicate between her fingers, though it was still empty. "Yes, ma'am? Would you bring a bottle from the cellar, the Bordeaux, 2002? "Of course." Elena bowed her head slightly, the way she always did, and slipped past her. Their shoulders nearly brushed, and in that narrow moment, Elena caught the faintest trace of her perfume, something floral, expensive, and utterly unreachable. The cellar lay at the far end of the mansion, down a staircase that descended into cool stone and shadow. She'd always disliked it. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and oak barrels, and the dim bulbs overhead hummed faintly as if reluctant to shine. Her footsteps echoed as she walked the rows and bottles, searching for the label. 2002, Bordeaux. Her eyes skimmed the shelves until they landed on it, tucked neatly in its place. She reached for it, but as her fingers brushed the glass, something else caught her eye. At the far end of the cellar, where the light grew weaker, a wooden trunk sat against the wall. She had never noticed it before. Dust clung to its edges, thick enough to suggest it hadn't been touched in years. The mansion was full of trunks and cabinets, all closed, all secrets. But after what she'd seen upstairs, Elena couldn't help herself. Her feet carried her closer, the wine bottle still in hand. The trunk was locked, a small brass clasp, tarnished with time. She crouched, fingertips grazing the cold metal, and for a second she thought she heard something. Footsteps above her head. She froze. But then silence returned, heavy and absolute. "Elena?" the voice called again, this time sharper, echoing faintly down the stairwell. She flinched, nearly dropping the wine bottle. "Yes, ma'am, coming." Her voice echoed too loud against the stone, breaking the spell of the cellar. She pulled her hand away from the trunk, forcing herself to return to the shelf. The Bordeaux felt heavier than before, though she knew it hadn't changed. When she emerged into the dining room once more, Mrs. Whitmore's eyes flicked immediately to the bottle. She nodded faintly, gesturing for Elena to set it on the table. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was polite, practiced, yet as Elena bowed her head, she felt the weight of Mrs. Whitmore's gaze linger, not on the wine, but on her. For the rest of the evening, Elena worked in silence. She cleared plates, folded napkins, arranged flowers, but the locket burned at the edges of her thoughts, the girl's smile flickering behind every polished surface. And under it all, the image of that locked trunk in the cellar sat waiting, like a shadow she couldn't ignore. Later, when the Whitmores retired upstairs, the rain still falling outside in silver sheets, Elena gathered her things to leave. She slipped on her coat at the back entrance, her bag heavy on her shoulder. As she reached for the door, she caught her reflection in the narrow mirror on the wall. Her face looked pale, her curls damp with the mist that had followed her in. For a moment she hardly recognized herself, not the invisible maid who swept and scrubbed, but someone standing at the edge of a story she wasn't meant to know. She pressed her palm to the glass, as if steadying herself, and quietly, almost as though saying it out loud might summon trouble, she whispered, "Who are you?" The rain answered, tapping against the windows, as Elena stepped out into the night. The dining room always felt colder than the rest of the house. Perhaps it was the marble floors, or the way the long table stretched like a silent ocean between its ends. Even when filled with polished silverware and glowing candles, it seemed more like a stage than a place where people shared meals. Elena had noticed long ago that the Whitmores never truly ate here as a family. They dined, yes, but they didn't share. As she polished the crystal glasses, her mind was elsewhere. The locket, the girl, the smile frozen in time. It was hard to imagine laughter echoing through these high ceilings. Harder still to picture Mrs. Whitmore with a child, her posture too perfect, her voice too composed. She wiped the last glass and stepped back. The chandelier above caught the light in prisms, scattering small rainbows over the tablecloth. For a moment, she simply stood there, staring, her hands trembling with a restlessness she couldn't name. "Elena," the voice again, softer this time but no less sharp. She turned to find Mrs. Whitmore at the doorway, her figure framed by the hallway's golden light. She was holding a wine glass, delicate between her fingers, though it was still empty. "Yes, ma'am? Would you bring a bottle from the cellar, the Bordeaux, 2002? "Of course." Elena bowed her head slightly, the way she always did, and slipped past her. Their shoulders nearly brushed, and in that narrow moment, Elena caught the faintest trace of her perfume, something floral, expensive, and utterly unreachable. The cellar lay at the far end of the mansion, down a staircase that descended into cool stone and shadow. She'd always disliked it. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and oak barrels, and the dim bulbs overhead hummed faintly as if reluctant to shine. Her footsteps echoed as she walked the rows and bottles, searching for the label. 2002, Bordeaux. Her eyes skimmed the shelves until they landed on it, tucked neatly in its place. She reached for it, but as her fingers brushed the glass, something else caught her eye. At the far end of the cellar, where the light grew weaker, a wooden trunk sat against the wall. She had never noticed it before. Dust clung to its edges, thick enough to suggest it hadn't been touched in years. The mansion was full of trunks and cabinets, all closed, all secrets. But after what she'd seen upstairs, Elena couldn't help herself. Her feet carried her closer, the wine bottle still in hand. The trunk was locked, a small brass clasp, tarnished with time. She crouched, fingertips grazing the cold metal, and for a second she thought she heard something. Footsteps above her head. She froze. But then silence returned, heavy and absolute. "Elena?" The voice called again, this time sharper, echoing faintly down the stairwell. She flinched, nearly dropping the wine bottle. "Yes, ma'am, coming." Her voice echoed too loud against the stone, breaking the spell of the cellar. She pulled her hand away from the trunk, forcing herself to return to the shelf. The Bordeaux felt heavier than before, though she knew it hadn't changed. When she emerged into the dining room once more, Mrs. Whitmore's eyes flicked immediately to the bottle. She nodded faintly, gesturing for Elena to set it on the table. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was polite, practiced, yet as Elena bowed her head, she felt the weight of Mrs. Whitmore's gaze linger, not on the wine, but on her. For the rest of the evening, Elena worked in silence. She cleared plates, folded napkins, arranged flowers, but the locket burned at the edges of her thoughts, the girl's smile flickering behind every polished surface. And under it all, the image of that locked trunk in the cellar sat waiting, like a shadow she couldn't ignore. Later, when the Whitmores retired upstairs, the rain still falling outside in silver sheets, Elena gathered her things to leave. She slipped on her coat at the back entrance, her bag heavy on her shoulder. As she reached for the door, she caught her reflection in the narrow mirror on the wall. Her face looked pale, her curls damp with the mist that had followed her in. For a moment she hardly recognized herself, not the invisible maid who swept and scrubbed, but someone standing at the edge of a story she wasn't meant to know. She pressed her palm to the glass, as if steadying herself, and quietly, almost as though saying it out loud might summon trouble, she whispered, "Who are you?" The rain answered, tapping against the windows, as Elena stepped out into the night. The next morning came muted, wrapped in a gray fog that pressed against the windows. The mansion seemed to exhale in heavy sighs, wood creaking softly, curtains shifting with drafts, the faint ticking of a grandfather clock echoing down the hall. Elena rose before the sun, as she always did, her body trained by years of discipline. Yet today felt different, as though she were walking into a play where the lines hadn't been written. She carried a basket of linen across the corridor, her footsteps softened by the plush rug beneath. At the far end of the hallway, the study doors stood ajar, usually locked, usually sealed away. But today it waited, slightly open, like a mouth daring her to enter. Her heart began to thrum. Elena hesitated only a second before setting the basket down and pressing against the door. The hinges groaned faintly, letting her slip inside. The study smelled of leather and dust, of old books and ink. Morning light filtered through tall windows, streaking across polished wood. She moved slowly, fingers brushing the spines of books, pausing on those bound in cracked leather. Each carried titles she didn't understand, histories, records, journals. And then she saw it. On the desk, half hidden beneath a folded newspaper, lay the locket, the same one from last night. Her breath caught. She reached out with trembling fingers, lifting it gently as though it might burn her skin. The clasp flicked open. The girl's face smiled again from inside, innocent, young, alive in a way that made Elena ache. But there was something else now. On the opposite side of the locket, where before there had been nothing, a faint engraving caught the light. Letters, delicate and curling, forming a single name. Her lips shaped it silently, her heart pounding faster. A sudden voice cut through the stillness. "What are you doing here?" Elena froze. At the doorway stood the woman of the house, regal, poised, her hair swept back, eyes sharp as glass. She did not move, yet the weight of her presence filled the room like a storm. I was cleaning," Elena stammered, quickly lowering the locket back onto the desk. Her fingers trembled as they brushed against the wood. You thought wrong." The woman's heels clicked against the floor as she entered, slow and deliberate. She closed the door behind her, shutting them both inside. For a moment only the faint hum of the clock could be heard. Her eyes fell to the locket, then back to Elena. "You touched it," she said, not as a question, but a fact. Elena's throat tightened. She tried to speak, but no sound came. The woman stepped closer, her expression unreadable. She lifted the locket, holding it between her fingers with a strange tenderness before letting it drop back onto the desk with a soft clink. "Some things," she whispered, "are better left untouched." The silence between them deepened, thick with warning. Elena lowered her gaze, her pulse hammering in her ears. Every instinct told her to apologize, to retreat, to vanish. And yet, beneath the fear, something stubborn stirred, a question she could not cage. "Who is she?" Elena asked, her voice breaking the silence like a fragile thread. The woman's lips pressed into a thin line. For a fleeting second, Elena thought she saw a flicker of sorrow in those sharp eyes, something human, something raw. But just as quickly it vanished. "You ask too many questions," the woman said coldly. "Do your work, and stay out of what does not concern you." She turned and swept out of the room, leaving the door wide open behind her. Elena stood frozen, her chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. The morning light fell across the desk, illuminating the locket as though it carried a truth too heavy for shadows. And in that moment, Elena knew with certainty, she was now part of a story far larger than herself.
The rest of the day unfolded in uneasy fragments, as if the house itself were aware of what had transpired. Elena carried trays, polished glasses, dusted shelves, but every sound, every glance seemed sharper, more pointed. She could feel eyes on her even when no one was there. By afternoon, the rain began. Heavy, persistent drops battered against the tall windows, blurring the gardens into shapes of gray and green. Thunder rolled in the distance, a low, growling presence that seemed to echo inside her chest. Elena was in the kitchen, scrubbing dishes, when the butler, an older man with stooped shoulders and hollow eyes, entered quietly. He seldom spoke, yet today he paused near her, his hand tightening around the edge of the counter. "You shouldn't go where you don't belong," he muttered, his voice rough, as though dragged from deep inside. Elena froze. Soap slid from her fingers into the sink. He did not look at her, only stared at the rain-streaked window. "This house," he continued, almost whispering, "remembers everything, and it punishes curiosity." Her heart thudded. She wanted to ask more, to press him for answers, but before she could, he turned and shuffled out, his footsteps fading into the hall. The storm deepened. Shadows thickened in the corners of the mansion. Later that evening, Elena carried fresh linen up the staircase, her arms aching beneath the weight. As she passed the second-floor landing, she noticed a faint glow spilling from the end of the corridor. It wasn't the soft amber of lamps, but a pale, wavering light, like candle flame. Her pulse quickened. Setting the linen down, she followed the glow. Each step echoed against the marble floor, her breath shallow, her hands damp. The light led her to a door she had never seen open before. The small room near the servants' quarters, always locked.
Now it stood ajar. She pushed it gently. The hinges whined. Inside, the air smelled of dust and lavender. A single candle flickered on a desk cluttered with papers, sketches, and old photographs. And there, pinned to the wall, was the girl from the locket. Dozens of pictures, some formal, taken in gardens and ballrooms, her face radiant and alive. Others more intimate, laughing in the sun, standing beside a horse, her eyes lit with mischief. Each photo carried a vitality that seemed at odds with the silence of this room. Elena's throat tightened. Among the photographs lay letters, their ink faded but still legible. She leaned closer, her fingers hovering over the papers. The handwriting was delicate, curling, almost fragile. I miss the sea. I miss the laughter of the servants in the kitchen. I feel the walls tightening here. Elena's eyes blurred. Whoever this girl was, she had been alive here, within these same walls, and yet forgotten, hidden away like dust beneath the rugs. A sound jolted her. The floorboard behind her creaked. Elena spun around, her breath catching in her chest. In the doorway stood the man of the house. His tall figure filled the frame, his face half lit by candlelight. He did not speak, but his eyes, dark, cold, unreadable, rested on her. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. Finally, his voice came, low and steady. You don't belong here. Elena swallowed hard, unable to find her words. His gaze dropped briefly to the photographs pinned to the wall, then back to her. For the first time, she thought she saw something flicker in his expression, not anger, but fear. He stepped closer. The candlelight trembled with the shift of air. Leave, he said softly, almost pleading, before this house eats you alive too.
The storm outside had grown furious, as if the sky itself wanted to split open. Lightning illuminated the mansion's windows in violent flashes, followed by thunder that rattled the very bones of the house. Elena left the hidden room with trembling hands, the man's warning echoing inside her skull. Before this house eats you alive too. The words clung to her like wet fabric, heavy and suffocating. She carried the linen upstairs in silence, but her steps faltered when she reached the third-floor corridor. The lamps along the wall flickered and dimmed, their glow swallowed by the storm's power. For an instant, the hall was plunged into complete darkness. And in that void, Elena thought she heard a faint voice, soft, like a girl's laughter carried by the wind. Her breath caught. She pressed her back to the wall until the lamp sputtered back to life, golden and weak. Imagination, she whispered to herself. Just imagination. But doubt gnawed at her. In the great dining hall, the wealthy couple sat as though nothing were amiss. The white male, his face pale under the chandelier, read through a thick set of documents while his wife slowly stirred her glass of wine. The butler lingered nearby, silent as stone. Elena moved quietly, serving them, her hands steady only because she forced them to be. She could feel the woman's eyes on her, sharp, probing, almost amused. "You seem distracted," she said suddenly, her voice smooth and cutting. Elena lowered her head. "No, madam, just the storm." A thin smile curved the woman's lips. "Storms always reveal more than they hide." The words sent a chill through Elena, colder than the thunder outside. She excused herself quickly, retreating to the kitchen where the smell of iron and damp wood replaced the heavy perfume of the dining hall. There, she found the gardener, a quiet, wiry man with soil permanently etched into his hands, staring out the window into the rain. He turned when he heard her, his eyes dark and restless. "You hear it too, don't you?" he asked in a low voice. Elena frowned. "Hear what?" "The house," he said, almost desperate. "It speaks in storms, always has. Don't you feel it? Someone walking behind you when no one is there? A voice in the silence?" Her throat tightened. She wanted to deny it, to dismiss it as superstition, but she couldn't. Not after the laughter in the dark corridor, not after the photographs of the girl. The gardener leaned closer, his voice a whisper. "You need to leave before you're trapped here, like she was." The thunder roared, shaking the glass panes, and at that moment, Elena could no longer bear the weight pressing on her chest. "Who was she?" Elena asked, her voice trembling. "The girl in the photographs. Who was she?" The gardener's face crumpled with sorrow, but before he could answer, footsteps echoed in the hall. Heavy, deliberate. The man of the house entered, his presence filling the room like a shadow. His gaze swept across them, sharp as a blade. "Go back to your quarters," he told Elena, his tone brooking no refusal. The gardener lowered his head, his lips pressed into a thin line. Elena wanted to resist, wanted to demand the truth, but her body betrayed her, moving toward the servants' stairs, her heart pounding in her ears. When she reached her small, dim room, the storm was at its peak. The ceiling groaned, the wind howled, and somewhere deep in the mansion, a door slammed shut with a force that shook the floor. Elena sat on the edge of her narrow bed, her hands clutching her lap. She closed her eyes, but sleep would not come. All she could see was the girl's face, the same face from the locket, the same face pinned on the walls of that forbidden room. And then, just as the thunder quieted for a heartbeat, she heard it again. A laugh. Soft. Fragile. Right outside her door.
The laughter lingered in the silence after thunder, so faint that Elena could have convinced herself it was only memory. But it came again, light, quick, childlike, dancing down the corridor outside her door. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She pressed her palms hard into her lap, nails digging into fabric. Every instinct told her to stay still, to lock the door, to pretend she had heard nothing. But something stronger pulled her to her feet. The storm outside had quieted to a steady rain, and with it came an unnatural stillness in the mansion. The usual creaks of the old house seemed hushed, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Elena pushed her door open slowly, the hinges groaning like a warning. The corridor stretched out before her, dimly lit by a single flickering lamp. Shadows swayed with each gust of wind against the windows. "Elena?" The whisper was so soft she thought it came from inside her own mind. But no, the sound came from farther down, near the old staircase that wound upward into the forbidden wing. Her bare feet carried her forward, step by careful step. She hugged herself tightly, her breath quake, clouding faintly in the cool air. At the top of the staircase, she stopped. A door stood slightly ajar, a sliver of pale light spilling into the hall. The same door she had seen earlier, locked and shut tight. Now it was waiting. Her hand shook as she pushed it open. Inside was a long forgotten bedroom. Dust hung in the air like fine smoke, stirred by a draft from a cracked window. The wallpaper peeled in strips, and the once fine furniture was draped in ghostly sheets. On the bed lay a small doll, its porcelain face cracked, its dress yellowed with time. Elena stepped closer, her throat tight. The air smelled faintly of lavender, aged, faded, but unmistakable. She lifted the doll with trembling fingers, brushing away dust. Its glass eyes stared back at her, clouded but eerily alive. And then, behind her, the door creaked shut. She spun, heart in her throat. The room was empty, only the sound of the rain against the glass. "Elena?" The voice was right beside her now. She dropped the doll in shock, its porcelain face shattering against the wooden floor. Her eyes darted to the cracked mirror on the wall. For just a moment, she saw her reflection, only it wasn't her. A young girl stood in her place, dark curls framing her pale face, her lips curved in a sad, almost pleading smile. Elena gasped, stumbling back. The vision flickered, gone as quickly as it appeared. The mirror showed only Elena now, her own wide, terrified eyes staring back. But deep in her chest, beneath the panic, something else stirred. Not just fear, not just dread. Recognition. As if some part of her had always known the girl was waiting.
Elena sank to the floor, knees drawn to her chest, trying to steady her racing heart. The shattered doll lay at her feet, pieces of porcelain glinting in the dim light like tiny fragments of truth. She forced herself to breathe, each inhale shaky, each exhale trembling with tension. The room was quiet now, oppressively quiet, but it no longer felt empty. A presence lingered, subtle and insistent, brushing against the edges of her mind. Elena's gaze drifted toward the small desk in the corner. A single, faded notebook lay there, its leather cover cracked and brittle. Something compelled her to pick it up. She ran her fingers across the surface, and the smell of old paper and lavender hit her, a ghost of memory and sorrow entwined. Opening it revealed neat handwriting, careful and deliberate, though the ink had faded to a gentle brown. Page after page told the story of a girl who had lived in this house decades before, a girl whose laughter had once filled these halls, whose secrets had been hidden behind locked doors, and whose fate had been cruelly interrupted. The girl had been clever, brave, but ultimately powerless against the weight of wealth and pride that had governed the household. Elena's hands trembled as she read. The words were alive, pulsing with the girl's lingering presence. She realized with a jolt, the girl she had seen in the mirror wasn't just a vision. She was a memory trapped in the house, waiting for someone to understand. "Elena!" The whisper returned, gentler this time, almost shy. Her gaze darted around the room, but nothing moved. Only the notebook remained, glowing faintly in the fading light. Her mind raced. How could a memory, a spirit, linger so vividly, and why had it chosen her?
She flipped to the last entry in the notebook. The handwriting ended abruptly, the final line smeared, as if the writer had been interrupted. If anyone finds this, know that I was never allowed to be heard. I loved, I laughed, I dreamed, but I was hidden away. Please, someone, remember me. Elena's chest tightened. The sadness in those words pressed against her heart. Tears streamed down her face as the weight of the girl's unspoken story settled upon her. And then, almost imperceptibly, the air shifted. The presence that had haunted the room seemed to lean closer, a warmth brushing against Elena's skin, as if in relief that she had finally understood. The faint outline of the girl appeared again in the mirror, smiling softly, almost shyly. Her hand seemed to reach out, a silent plea for connection. Elena whispered, barely audible, I remember you. I see you. The figure lingered a moment longer, then slowly faded, leaving the room feeling lighter, yet charged with quiet significance. Outside, the rain had stopped. The storm that had mirrored Elena's inner turmoil now gave way to a tentative dawn, soft light spilling through the cracked window, illuminating the dust motes like tiny floating stars. Elena rose, notebook clutched to her chest. She felt a shift in herself, a new understanding, a fragile sense of purpose. She had been chosen to carry the memory forward, to honor the life that had been silenced. As she stepped toward the door, the hallway seemed less foreboding, the shadows less oppressive. The house, for the first time in decades, felt less like a prison and more like a keeper of stories. Elena knew she had to uncover more to connect the past with the present, and perhaps to find a way to heal the lingering wounds that had bound the spirit here for so long. Her journey was far from over, but for the first time she felt a quiet hope, a gentle assurance that she was no longer alone.
Elena stepped cautiously down the hallway, notebook pressed against her chest like a talisman. The mansion felt alive in a way it hadn't before, each creak and groan of the old wood echoing memories that seemed to swirl just beneath the surface. The air smelled faintly of dust and lavender, the remnants of lives long past, mingling with the soft morning light that poured through the tall windows. She moved from room to room, each space telling its own story. A child's chair overturned in the corner of the parlor, a cracked teacup still resting on a side table, faded wallpaper peeling like fragile petals. Elena traced her fingers along the surfaces, absorbing the histories embedded in the walls. At last, she entered the attic. The ceiling sloped sharply, and the room was dim, lit only by the pale morning sun filtering through a single round window. Boxes and trunks were stacked haphazardly, some broken, some spilling their contents onto the floor. Her gaze fell on a small trunk tucked away in the corner. She knelt, brushing off decades of dust, and carefully opened it. Inside were letters, photographs, and delicate pieces of fabric, a collection of memories, intimate and raw. Each item spoke of a life lived quietly, with courage and resilience that had gone unseen by the world. Elena carefully lifted a faded photograph. It showed a young girl standing proudly in front of the mansion, her dark eyes bright with hope and curiosity. The resemblance to the figure in the mirror was uncanny. Her chest tightened. The girl's story was no longer a ghostly fragment. It was tangible, woven into the very fabric of the house. Tears filled Elena's eyes as she whispered, "I will remember you. I promise." Suddenly, a soft glow filled the attic, warm and golden.
The outline of the girl appeared once more, smiling, radiant, peaceful, free. She stepped forward, reaching out, and Elena felt the touch like a gentle breeze across her hand. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. The girl's presence shimmered, then slowly dissolved, leaving the attic bathed in light, calm and serene. Elena sank to the floor, notebook and photograph in her lap. A sense of completion, of purpose, settled over her. She realized that her own life had shifted, that she had been entrusted not just with the girl's story, but with the ability to honor it, to ensure that the past would not be forgotten. She rose, the mansion now quiet and welcoming rather than imposing. Walking down the hallway, Elena felt lighter, as if the weight of the unspoken years had lifted. The sun shone fully now, painting the rooms in warm gold, turning shadows into gentle, forgiving forms. Outside, the garden glimmered with droplets from the previous night's rain, each one catching the light like tiny jewels. Elena stepped onto the lawn, inhaling deeply. For the first time in her life, she felt a profound connection, not just to the mansion, but to the lives intertwined within it, to the histories that had shaped it, and to the hope that lay ahead. She knew that the girl's memory would live on, cherished and honored, and that her own story, now intertwined with that of the past, had found its voice. Elena smiled softly, a mixture of relief, gratitude, and quiet joy. As she looked toward the horizon, the morning sun breaking fully over the garden, she realized that every ending had the possibility of a beginning. The mansion, once a place of hidden sorrows, had become a sanctuary of remembrance, healing, and connection. And in that golden light, Elena understood. She was not alone. She had never truly been alone. And now, finally, the story could breathe freely. The journey had ended, but the legacy would continue, carried gently in the hearts of those who remembered.